Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to introduce my friend to you, Mr. Tim Girvin.
So what I'm hoping is today to give you a little bit of an insight into who I am and how I think about these things. As Mark's referenced, I have been around for a long time. I mean, I started in 1976, and most of the people that work with me now haven't lived as long as I've been a designer. So that's an interesting statement right there. But I think that probably the most profound part of who I am is about curiosity and my own sort of continuing exploration of what the meaning of the work is. And if there's anything that I can offer to you today, it would be to consider the idea of the meaning of what it is that you're doing. The power of a story exists when you don't necessarily know what's inside the box. The real power of the transformation and the experience as you move into a story is that there are things that are left to be discovered. And the journey that all of us have in brand and story and communication and design and marketing, all the work that we're doing is really about this idea of what's inside the box. What do we know? What do we not know? What does the future hold? What is the magic of it? Because that's what we do. The work that we do is really about magic. It's really about taking an idea and transforming it into another idea. This is something that I don't do necessarily just in terms of client work, but I find myself doing this in that phrase, I find myself. So I tend to examine what it is that we do as Girvin at the firm, but also what am I doing? And what is the truth of what I'm doing in relationship to the work? Trying to consider that kind of examination. For me, what I'm really thinking about is the personal knowledge, the engagement that you have. When you talk about the soul of the brand, I think about the soul of you and who you are and what that means in relationship to the work that you do, the power of the work that you do, how you engage with it, how your spiritual presence links to the creativity that you do. Because being creative as a writer, as a designer, as a strategist, as a planner is an entirely spiritual thing. Of course, there's a business outcome, but it really is about this interpretation of spirit and how you see and sense things and how you draft them in a new way. We actually first started talking about the idea of a story tied to brand about in the mid-90s. And this is back when brand and story were, very few people were discussing this. And we actually did a talk at Procter & Gamble that was about the thematic structure of a story and thematic structure of a brand and how they intertwine with each other. And I think one of the things that is interesting, especially given my extraordinary maturity and age, is the patterning that happens in your life and your perception. And I was just talking with a woman last night from New York about this idea of the work that you do, the creative that you offer, the strategies that you write, the character. There's sort of chromosomal nodes that happen, that have been happening in your life for a long time. And have you ever taken the time to walk back and examine those nodes, to go back and look at the point where your heart first opened? The first, like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to be doing. There's a pattern that works its way forward in terms of those discoveries that you make, where some part of you is revealed again and again and again. And of course, that can be a very beautiful thing. It can also be a very dark thing. But we're focusing on the beautiful side. And what does that mean in terms of how you think about this? Because the crossover that I'm trying to get to today in discussing this is the bridge between humanity humankind, human condition, and the brand or the enterprise. And what does it mean as you, with each of your design shops or your marketing communications, what do you mean in relationship to the work that you do? What is your story, the truth of your story, and how does that intertwine with the truth of what you offer in terms of that business and the nature of that? Relevance, resonance, and relationships. I call these the 3 R's, and some of you, I'm sure, have your own interpretation of this. It kind of comes down to who cares? You know, that fundamental question of who cares, which means if I'm telling you something, is it really relevant to you? Do you really care about it? And if I do tell you something, and it is relevant, does it resonate? Meaning that have I told you what you need in a way that you can actually embrace it? Or is it just, bullshit? Because the core is how I communicate with you has to be in your language, has to be in a way that you can grasp it. You could say, I was listening to that Girvin guy and he said this one thing and I'll never forget that. And that's all I'm looking for, is that one point of resonation. And then, of course, relationship. The thing that's fascinating about relationship is, I'm sure many of you know, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, is that relationship comes from relatus, the Latin word, which means to carry. And the idea of relationship and relatus is to tell a story. That's what it's all about. So my ability to tell you something that is resonant and relevant to you, something unique, something that is important, is also my ability to tell you something that you will hold. And you will take away and say, this is now my story. I'm holding this. And I think in the core of what we do, ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is I tell you something that is powerful and meaningful and right for you, and you take it away and you become my storyteller. You walk away with that. One of the things that I think is important for us to be looking at is the relationship between the idea of cult and culture. So when I connect with the people at Blackbird, for example, I'm drawing them into my cult, which happens to be perfume. Those of you who know me, I have a huge history with fragrance. It started in Paris. It started when I was a little kid. I loved packaging for perfumes and that whole deal. So I got into that cult, and then I got into sharing and exploring that with somebody. There's this woman at Nordstrom that has been perpetually feeding me things. She knows that I have this affection, this cultish attachment to Alexander McQueen. So she's always going, oh, here's this. Here's an umbrella. It's only $700. Yeah, right. But it's fun, that exchange. And so in a manner, when you think about the cult of a proposition, whether it's an association, an organization, or whether it's a brand, or whether it's a small business, what is the cult around it? And then how does the culture emerge? Because they're linked together. The character of those things are linked together in a powerful way. In the work that we do, what's the intention of what we're trying to do? What is the drive forward? And then how careful are we about that? How careful do we place our attention on what we do in terms of the work that we offer? And then ultimately, what is the attraction to it? How does that cycle continue to turn? And so when I use a circle like this, or a volute, or a spiral, I'm really looking at that idea of how that turning, how that evolution happens. Let me just tell you that actually the real core of that proposition is about humanity and about connecting with people. So when we get into a journey of working on a relationship, I usually have a question process, which here is called a quest. And it is a way of connecting with people, treating that investigation as a journey. So me coming and spending time with you, coming and being inside a client space. Because one of the things that happens, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, is you go into a brand and you can feel the vibe of what it's going to be. You can tell, like, are these people smiling? Is this a happy place, or is this what kind of place is this? What's the vibe here? What's the attitude? What's the warmth? What is the, how does it all come out? And that then becomes the beginning of your sensation about the instinct of what goes on. And I think that you can't be too judgmental, because I have gone to work with people in their houses, or I've worked with, one leader who's had 300 people with them. So there's kind of a jump and a variation on that. But the beginning for me is always about a quest or a process of trying to walk that line and explore the soul of an organization. And what I'm looking for is, if you have a promise for me, what is that promise? So some of you call that mission, but promise and mission, another etymology, are actually aligned with each other. They come from the same idea, nisere, which is to send. So if I go on a mission, I'm sending a story, I'm sending something out. So when we think about that, or you think about a vision of how you see ahead, or what are your values, or what are your attributes, who are you? How does that work? How do you get to understanding what those core positions and messages are, and how resonant or how relevant they are to the audiences that you have? I mean, will people take that and hold it, or not? Sometimes you work with people who have this extraordinary sense of style and depth. They have an eye, and they have an eye that is very specific to an ideology that wraps around their aesthetic. And so the funny thing was that Noni and I had an aesthetic that was actually relatively similar, because one, we both really liked ravens, and that was part of her iconography for Butter London. Working with her and her team was about reaching into the character of Noni and her leadership of this brand, and then walking further into how could we effectively develop a message set in terms of looking at the messages that were there that could be tuned. How can we think about it in terms of blast or other content, developing a style in terms of blasted content to customers, looking at the relationship to these other elements, like the social media and packaging and merchandising, display, and all those things. But again, for me, the issue was really how to be thinking about this in relationship to the humanity of what that brand stands for. Because one of the things that's fascinating about this, and there's a lot of men here, so you don't know this world at all, is that women, as customers, have an ability to hold on to a brand relationship that's quite a bit different than men. And as a result, there will be people out in the middle of nowhere, and you happen to mention butter, and they instantly know what it is. They know that it's not like something you put on bread, but it's a nail line. And it all really comes down to this sense of art direction, this sense of color that Noni represented. So for us, it was really about kind of interpretation. Then Trish May, she's a Microsoft retiree and a survivor, and she came asking for help to think about a product that could be developed that could be used to support breast cancer research. And so part of the transformation was actually thinking about what is a product that could be created, but then a percentage of the cost, 100% of the profits would be gifted to breast cancer research, which resulted in several $1 million worth of product. But part of what we did in our workshop with her was focus on this idea of victory, because one of the things that I'm sure those of you who've known survivors is that the journey of from discovery to the cure is one of progressive, sometimes small victories, step by step. And so we wanted to think about that idea, the celebration of the victory. The victory starts here. The victory is now in the beginning, the first step. So that was part of our effort for her. SHENUI is a brand that was founded by a husband and wife team based on a customized ingredient development program. Very difficult to make this happen, but they've been successful in doing that. And the goal is to look at how can we tell a story, a color story that can interpret into a retail story. Some of you may know that my history when I was starting in the 70s, one of my first jobs that I pursued as a freelancer was working as a retail designer for Nordstrom. And what I did was shopping bags, signage, store makeovers. I dressed windows. I did merchandising and display. I did everything because I really was interested in trying to learn about that. So one of the things that I tend to think about when we get into packaging is how does this interpret in relationship to an environment. So if we're designing a product, how could this be spilled into a bigger story? How could we work on that expansion? So we did that with TRISH and Athena. We did that with Butter London, and we did that with these guys. Each one of these is really about the relationship between the human, the person, the story, the brand, the proposition, and how that unfolds. And what I tend to do is I look for the truth of what that is. And usually the truth is going to be the closest to the soul. Thank you very much.